James had always considered himself an ordinary guy. Growing up in a small town with modest aspirations, he never thought much about his mind, how it worked, or how much control he truly had over it. Life seemed simple enough. Go to school, get a job, make a living. His ambitions didn't stretch far beyond the usual checklist. But as he entered adulthood, life began to feel overwhelming in ways he hadn't anticipated. Stress at work, relationship struggles, and an endless stream of distractions made him feel like he was losing control of his own mind. At 28, James was working as an accountant for a mid-sized firm. The job paid well, but he found little joy in it. His days were filled with numbers, spreadsheets, and tight deadlines, leaving him mentally drained by the time he got home. Outside of work, he spent his evenings mindlessly scrolling through social media, binge-watching TV shows, and playing video games. His life felt like a cycle of distractions, and he often struggled to stay focused on anything important. One afternoon, after a particularly stressful week at work, James found himself sitting at his desk, staring blankly at the computer screen. His mind was foggy, his thoughts scattered, and he couldn't focus on the simplest tasks. Frustrated, he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of emptiness wash over him. "I don't understand," he muttered to himself. "Why can't I just focus? Why is it so hard to stay in control of my own mind?" James decided to take a break and go for a walk. As he strolled through the park, he noticed how distracted everyone around him seemed. People were glued to their phones, oblivious to the world around them. He couldn't help but wonder if they felt the same sense of mental chaos that he did. Later that evening, while browsing the internet, James stumbled upon an article about mindfulness and meditation. It wasn't something he had ever been interested in, but the headline caught his eye. Asterisk, learn to control your mind before it controls you. Asterisk, curiosity piqued. James clicked on the article. The author spoke about how modern life was filled with distractions, stress, and mental clutter. The article explained that many people felt like their minds were out of control because they had never learned how to manage their thoughts. The solution, the author suggested, was mindfulness, a practice that could help people become aware of their thoughts and regain control over their minds. James read on, intrigued by the idea. The article described mindfulness as the ability to be fully present in the moment, aware of your thoughts, feelings, and surroundings without being overwhelmed by them. It claimed that mindfulness could improve focus, reduce stress, and help people take control of their mental state. Something clicked inside James as he read those words. He realized that his problem wasn't just about focus, it was about his entire relationship with his mind. He had been letting his thoughts and emotions run wild, never questioning them or taking control of them. He decided it was time to make a change. The next day, James bought a book on mindfulness and meditation. It was a short, practical guide that promised to teach him how to train his mind and regain control over his thoughts. The first chapter was about meditation, a practice that involved sitting quietly, focusing on your breath, and observing your thoughts without judgment. It sounded simple enough, but when James tried it for the first time, he was shocked by how difficult it was. His mind raced with thoughts about work, his to-do list, and random memories from years ago. He couldn't sit still for more than a few minutes before feeling restless. Frustrated, he gave up and told himself that maybe meditation just wasn't for him. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was exactly the problem. His mind had become so used to constant stimulation and distraction that sitting quietly even for a few minutes, felt impossible. If he couldn't even control his mind for a few minutes, how could he expect to control it in the long run? Determined not to give up, James decided to give meditation another try the next morning. This time, he set a timer for 5 minutes and told himself he would stick with it, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. He sat down in a quiet corner of his living room, closed his eyes, and focused on his breath. Once again, his mind wandered. Thoughts popped up left and right what he needed to do at work, whether or not he'd remembered to pay his phone bill, the conversation he had with a friend last week. But instead of getting frustrated, James remembered the advice from the book. Simply observe your thoughts, but don't get caught up in them. Let them come and go, like clouds passing in the sky. For the first time, James was able to watch his thoughts without being pulled into them. He realized that his mind was like a wild horse, constantly galloping in different directions. But the more he practiced, the more he felt like he was gaining control of the reins. Over the next few weeks, James continued to practice mindfulness and meditation every day. At first, it was challenging, but slowly he began to notice small changes. He felt more present at work, more focused on the tasks at hand. His mind no longer wandered as much during conversations with friends, and he found himself less overwhelmed by stress and distractions. One afternoon, while sitting at his desk at work, James received an email from his boss. It was a last-minute request for a report that needed to be completed by the end of the day. Normally, this would have sent James into a panic, but this time, something was different. He took a deep breath, focused on his breathing for a few moments, and then calmly began working on the report. His mind remained clear, and he finished the task with time to spare. As the weeks turned into months, James continued to deepen his practice. He started incorporating mindfulness into every aspect of his life. When he ate, he paid attention to the flavors and textures of the food. When he walked, he noticed the feeling of his feet on the ground and the sounds around him. When he worked, he focused on one task at a time, resisting the urge to multitask. The more James practiced, the more he realized that controlling his mind wasn't about forcing his thoughts to disappear. It was about learning to observe them without getting lost in them. He began to understand that his mind was always active. It would always produce thoughts, worries, and distractions, but he didn't have to be controlled by them. One of the biggest breakthroughs for James came during a particularly stressful time at work. The company was going through a major restructuring, and everyone was on edge. There were rumors of layoffs, and James couldn't help but feel anxious about his future. In the past, he would have let his mind spiral into worrying and fear, imagining the worst-case scenarios. But now, with his new mindfulness skills, James took a different approach. Every time his mind started to wander into anxious territory, he brought his focus back to the present moment. He reminded himself that he couldn't control the future, but he could control how he responded to it. Instead of worrying about things that hadn't happened yet, he focused on doing his best work and staying grounded in the present. This newfound sense of control over his mind spilled into other areas of his life as well. His relationships improved. As he became more present and attentive during conversations, he found himself enjoying activities that he had once considered mundane, simply because he was fully engaged in the moment. One evening, James sat down to reflect on how far he had come. He realized that, for most of his life, he had been living on autopilot, letting his mind control him rather than the other way around. His thoughts, emotions, and distractions had dictated his actions, and he had felt powerless to change it. But now, James knew that he had the power to control his mind. It wasn't easy, and it required constant practice, but it was possible. He had learned that his mind was like a muscle. It could be trained and strengthened over time. And the more he practiced mindfulness, the more control he gained. James smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that life would continue to throw challenges his way. Stress, distractions, and uncertainties would always be there. But now he was better equipped to handle them. He had learned that the key to controlling his mind wasn't about eliminating thoughts or emotions. It was about learning to navigate them with awareness, clarity, and patience. As he closed his eyes and focused on his breath, James felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey he had embarked on. He had learned that the mind, when controlled, could be his greatest ally. And with that knowledge, he was ready to face whatever life had in store for him, one mindful breath at a time.